Steppenwolf is a 1927 novel by the Nobel Prize-winning German-Swiss author Hermann Hesse. Hesse was born in Germany in 1877, but as an opponent of German militarism, he spent World War I in Switzerland working for the Red Cross, and he gained Swiss citizenship in 1919. He underwent Jungian psychoanalysis in middle age, and in many ways he resembles Jung in probing the relevance of religious/spiritual questions to modern life. This review contains spoilers. Steppenwolf is about a 48-year-old former Orientalist and a classical music lover named Harry Haller and his failed quest for spiritual completeness. Haller recognises two contradictory parts to his personality: a human part which seeks conviviality and civilization, and a wolfish part after which the novel is named, which pulls him in the opposite direction. Steppenwolf literally means wolf of the steppes. On the conventional reading of the novel, Harry Haller is a brave pioneer of the soul, cast adrift in a sea of bourgeois mediocrity and struggling heroically to discover something of enduring value. But I think that's wrong. So what sort of a mad is he then? Well, he does have potential, at least he's searching. But he's voluntarily jobless and he isn't in a relationship. He spends all day introspecting, and his best conclusion is that he's got an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other. Of course, he doesn't put it like that because that's too trite. In many ways, he's a typical middle-aged man of independent means, lonely, self-pitying, and a little smug. That's a controversial reading, but it's supported by the fact that the wolf as a symbol for a person's dark side wasn't original even in 1927. There was the wolf in sheep's clothing of Christianity. There were warriors turning into wolves in Proto-Indo-European and Dacian mythology. There were werewolves, and cases of clinical lycanthropy going back to at least the 7th century CE. To appreciate how much of a cliché it was, we only need to reflect on how eagerly the Nazis later embraced it. Haller has the opportunity to discard it early on in the novel. He's given a mysterious treatise on the Steppenwolf, apparently addressed to him. It tells him ominously Harry lies about himself twice over when he employs his niggardly wolf theory. But of course, he rejects that assessment. In any case, he isn't alone for very long. About a third of the way into the novel, in a purely random encounter in a public house, he meets an exceptionally attractive young woman called Hermine. Hermine understands him like no one else can, and she desires nothing more than to bring him out of his shell. She even introduces him to a second, even more attractive woman called Maria, with whom he goes on to have regular, no-strings-attached sex. In short, the whole story is beginning to look ludicrously unrealistic. What are their ulterior motives, these women? Well, they don't have any. They just want to care for poor, tortured Harry. But this is arguably where it gets interesting, because while Harry Haller is undoubtedly the novel's protagonist, he certainly isn't its most important character. The most important characters are Hermine, Pablo, an enigmatic saxophone player, and Mozart, yes, the composer, who appears in a kind of final judgment role at the end. But none of the characters is really that important. Ultimately, they all deconstruct themselves in a variety of explicit ways. This is above all a philosophical novel, and it's the philosophical passages, not the characters, that provide the key to unlocking it. The most important are firstly the Steppenwolf treatise at the beginning, secondly a long statement by Hermine about eternity just over halfway in, and thirdly Mozart's long speech at the end. Hesse's philosophy at this point in his life seems to have been a mixture of Buddhist skepticism about the unity of the self and a full-blown Platonism regarding higher, better realities beyond the senses. Hermine, it turns out at the end of the novel, isn't remotely real, but then we already knew that, and Haller is no kind of hero. When it's a question of anything stupid and pathetic and devoid of humour and wit, "You're the man," is the novel's final verdict on him. His sole virtue, it seems, consists in knowing on some level that this world is illusory, and knowing, therefore, that he's simply marking time until death releases him. He's stupid because he still insists on clinging to his ideals, to his sense of propriety, and above all, to his narcissistic conviction that being an irascible loner makes him anything like a wolf. Because this world's a prolonged joke, its appreciation requires a highly developed sense of humour. Unfortunately, however, Harry's a po-faced bore. Steppenwolf is unlike most 20th century philosophical fiction in being both highly regarded by the critics and apparently committed to the reality of a world beyond ours, providing you don't approach it like a lot of young people apparently did in the 1960s, hoping to find a role model in Harry Haller. It's a very interesting read indeed.